Hey, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to show you how I replaced the air filter in my Multistrada 1260 Enduro. This way you can make the decision on your own whether or not you want to pay the dealership hundreds of dollars to do it or just do it yourself. The entire process was fairly easy except for one step which typically requires a special tool from Ducati. I however was able to successfully use 4 small screwdrivers to disassemble the part. So I will explain how I did that. Now, according to Ducati, you are supposed to clean the air filter every 9,000 miles and replace every 18,000 miles. I personally have never been a fan of cleaning air filters, so let's get this air filter replaced. I started by removing the luggage compartments so that I did not have anything in my way for future steps. I then removed my rear seat and cleaned out my junk drawer, followed by the primary seat. One thing that you will notice as I work through this is I always put the bolts back where I remove them as I work through disassembly. That way it's easier when putting the bike back together, not having to dig through a bucket of bolts, trying to figure out which one goes where. Now, since I will be disconnecting a lot of sensors and disconnecting the fuel line, I will want to avoid any chance of spark or fire, so I will remove the battery and place away from the bike and work area. Also, as you work through the process, it is a good idea to take pictures of particular complex wire routings. I have a good amount of additional wiring here, so I want to make sure that when I'm all done, all the charging points and the Baja aftermarket lights are reconnected correctly. This blue zip tie on my bike is securing the Baja lights wiring. If you're interested in installing some Baja lights, I have the install linked above. After I removed the zip tie, I disconnected the lights so I could remove the crash bars. I started by loosening the left side bolt to the frame, and then I removed the bolt connected to the crossbar. I then completely removed the bolts to the frame. I then removed the 2 bolts under the nose, and then removed the bolt above the radiator last. I then removed the portion that was loose. You then remove the right side frame bolt and the bolt above the radiator on the right side, and the entire crash guard system will come off. I then started to remove the side panels. The air filter is going to be right here, right? Not a chance. Once you remove the aluminum cover, there is a second plastic cover piece which also needs to be removed. Start by removing all of the 4mm head bolts that you can find. Then there will be 2 additional pieces you have to remove in order to get to the final bolts to remove that secondary plastic cover. One being a small panel under the nose, which is secured by 3 screws. You then have to pull down and back slightly. This is the post piece which rides in the grommet. Next I remove the cover piece by pulling straight up. It is secured by 2 rubber grommets. You then remove the 2 bolts securing the skinny side piece that says Ducati on it. This piece then slides forward. Here you can see the slots that you are removing the part from. You can then remove the remaining bolts securing the side panel. After all the screws are removed, there is a single point in the back which is secured by a rubber grommet. I then followed the same steps for the other side of the bike. Next I removed all the screws from the fuel cap, as I have to remove the red panel which covers the fuel tank, and these screws mount directly to the top of the fuel tank. There are then these 2 side screws on each side, 2 up front and 2 in the back. The left side rear bolt was a pain. I had to use a long ball end Allen wrench to remove it. A really long normal Allen wrench would also work, but I did not have one long enough. Then make sure that the wire connections are unsecured from the panel, and then lift up on the large panel and remove the breather lines from the fuel cap. One has a clamp which you'll have to use a small pair of pliers to remove, and then the tubes slip right off. Then this panel will come off. Make sure that you keep the opening of the fuel tank covered so you do not accidentally drop something inside the fuel tank. Now I had to remove the fuel tank. I started by disconnecting the sensors from the top right and left sides of the fuel tank. The most difficult part of this entire job happened at this point. There is a rigid plastic part on the left side with a special holder that is fragile, and many people talk about how they have broken them when removing this piece, so do not force it. The plastic tube that goes into the special connector should come out without any force. Typically this requires a special tool from Ducati. However, I used 4 small screwdrivers as I did not have that special tool. I gently placed each screwdriver down into the part where the special tool would go to depress the spring-loaded arms, which locked the black plastic tube into place. The black tube then pulled straight up with no resistance. If one of the 4 spring-loaded securing arms is not disengaged, the black tube will not come out, and if you try to force it, it will break. For the sensor on the right, pull up on the clip in the inside, and the male part of the plug can be pulled out. Then I turn off the fuel valves and remove the fuel line. There is a clamp which uses a regular screwdriver to loosen. The fuel line itself was a pain, so I had to use the screwdriver to help it get started to remove it. Before you do this though, make sure you recognize you are working near your fuel tank and your radiator, neither of which you want the screwdriver to slip and accidentally poke a hole in, so be extremely careful. I then removed the 2 bolts at the front of the tank, securing it to the frame. You can then lift the tank slightly forward and up and away from the bike to remove it. Now place it someplace safe and make sure the fuel tank opening remains covered. At this point you can see the airbox. I then removed the padding and blew off the airbox with compressed air. There was a good amount of dust and sand on top of mine. I then removed the screws from the wiring harness cover and set aside. I then removed all the screws securing the airbox cover, clipped a couple of zip ties securing the wiring harness to the airbox so I could remove the lid, and then finally disconnected the air sensor and removed the airbox cover. And holy cow, we finally find the air filter. The first thing I noticed was that the air filter had a lot of sand and dirt in the filter webbing. There was also a lot of sand around the outside of the filter. At this point, I really wish the filter wasn't positioned like this so that all the dirt wanted to fall inside the intake. I used the vacuum cleaner to remove all the visible sand. I then carefully removed the air filter and found a bunch more sand, which I proceeded to vacuum up. Hopefully none of it fell inside my intake. My recommendation for anyone planning to do this themselves would be to hang the bike from the ceiling after you remove the fuel tank, so all the sand will fall out rather than into your intake. Tell me what your best thoughts are for the best way to keep the sand from falling into your engine. I then reinstalled the filter and reassembled the bike in the reverse order. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe for future content.